but it is kind of done in that it works at all. And also, the newest version of the code is not deployed. So what I'm going to show you in the code and what I'm going to demo are not the same in functionality quite, but they're like close. It's pretty good. Yeah. So Cheogram is the answer to the question, what about all those people who are still just texting with their SMSs? And a lot of talking to them. Well, there's all kinds of things around for if I just want to message one person. But if I want to have a group conversation with a bunch of people, and I want to add SMS users into that, then this is the solution to that problem. Or this is my attempt at a solution to that problem. Interestingly, when I was explaining this to my family last night, my grandma said, how do I get SMS on my phone? Is that an app that I install? That was fun. But that's okay. Then my mom said, well, then my mom was like, no, Grandma, it's texting. Texting is SMS. And then Grandma was like, oh, texting I do, yeah. That's all good. So like my mom straightened her out. It was good.
Your grandma's more up to date than I am.
It's funny actually. My grandma does like Facebook and stuff on her phone, but she doesn't know how. But she does it routinely. We see her post updates, and she only has her phone. She doesn't have a laptop. But then she'll tell us about how she doesn't know how to do it. But then she'll do it again. Like she just accidentally stumbles on how to do it every now and then does it for a while, and then forgets again. I don't even know what's happening. It's really fun. Okay, so Cheogram is here. Demo. Okay, let's demo. Let's do it from here. I'm gonna join some like dev house. And I'm gonna invite Christopher. What's your phone number?
No one listen. 226 339 3063. Yeah, totally.
Okay. Now I'm really hoping this works.
Yeah, me too.
Because normally it does, but like I'm sitting in front of a bunch of people, so probably.
Now is the time when it definitely won't.
That's right. It's the demo guides. You get anything, Christopher?
Not so far, Steven.
That's awesome.
Did you get the phone number right? No, it'll be really, I know this demo, it'll be really obvious.
226 339 3063.
Yeah, it's the one.
Okay. Checking those. That error. You're not getting anything?
Not so far.
Okay, well, whatever.
Do your phone number.
Do my phone number. 226. No, that's not what my phone number is. Tested this earlier, but you know how it is. So anyway, what it does is it sends you a text message being like, hey, your friend has invited you to this group. And then if they accept the invitation by saying join on the texting back join, then they're in, and then you can message each other from the thing. Let me see if I can create one from my phone.
So does it make like a single number that happens to send a message to everyone that's part of the group?
It doesn't do anything nearly that smart. There is a single number for the whole app. You can only be in one group at a time over SMS.
Okay.
But the idea with this, hopefully, is that it's just dead. Something's wrong. The demo is not working. But that's okay. I'll show you code. That's just as good as a demo. Big on here? Yeah, this is the one that's big on here. The idea is hopefully that anybody who's a sort of power user that's going to have a whole bunch of groups of people isn't the sort of person who is using primarily SMS to manage their groups. Like maybe that's true. Maybe there will be a huge demand for people to have like lots of groups over SMS. At which point, that's an interesting question because it's really expensive. SMS is really expensive, right? The cheapest that you can get without having a huge volume is I think it's 0.35 cents per text message, which sounds small until you think about the number of messages. Right, if you're in a group of only 4 people, every one message sent to that group has to send 3 texts. If you have a conversation of only 100 messages, that's 300 messages. At 500 messages, you cross $2 in a month, and that's with one group of 4 people.
Messages. Yeah.
Right? So if you had any kind of use case, you would. So I'm using a fun hack where I am using a provider that the terms of service says that I can only use it for person-to-person messaging. And I'm choosing to interpret that as this is clearly person-to-person. A person sends the message, people receive it. There's a bot in the middle, but the bot doesn't do anything but communicate between people. I'm sure they will interpret their own terms of service differently when they find me. But for now, it's $2 a month for unlimited texting. Which makes it actually tractable to do, because otherwise it would be impossible to really afford to run it at this scale. I mean, I could run it for demos, but that's not interesting at all. And then if you want to have a bunch of stuff, you could use an app or something to do your group chats the way you normally would.
Yeah.
And then you just invite your friends who are only on text into the one group chat you want to have with them. They're in it with you. And if they're like, hey, how do I make more of these? Then you say, get the app. That's kind of the trajectory of the overall plan, is that I could make the SMS interface really good, but really if you want a really good interface, you don't want SMS, because SMS doesn't give you in-order delivery or guaranteed delivery at all, or delivery anytime in the next 5 minutes at all, or like lengths over 160 characters, or characters like sometimes with the provider I'm using, angle brackets don't even work. You can't even send angle brackets. It's like, what? So SMS is pretty bad. So you could do a lot of work in making it as good as possible, and it would still be kind of crap. Or you could make it just good enough that people can use it, and then tell them that if they want it to be better, like that's why we have the internet. That's basically the general thrust of my idea here. So how do you do that? How does the backend work such that is even possible? So the backend is all XMPP. So it's really, can you see that? Or maybe make it bigger. The backend is really simple from a user standpoint. Every single phone number in North America has a virtual Jabber identity phone number at sms.cheogram.com, where the phone number has to be in full form with country code, so you have to put the 1, even though I only support North America, because if I ever supported anything else, I don't want to go back and change it. So I just require 1s now. But most clients, I shouldn't say most clients, some clients, the one that I tried, and also some other ones, support this cool protocol where you just add sms.cheogram.com to your contact list, and then it auto-detects, oh, this is a thing that knows how to translate to SMS. And then when you go to add contacts or invite people or whatever, it's like, do you want to add a normal contact or an SMS contact? And then you just type in the phone number, you don't need to put the 1 in, and my service will auto-convert it into the full thing with the sms.cheogram.com and all that. You just have to type in the phone number, and then it'll just work, which is awesome. And then you can invite people, you send people normal invites the same way you would to anyone else on your chat system. And then they get all the text message that says, so-and-so has invited you, and then they join the room, and then anything they say to that phone number, you get in the room, and anything you say in the room goes back to the phone number. So in fact, if you invite multiple SMS friends, as far as Cheogram is concerned, like, it doesn't keep track of who's in what group at all. It only bridges each phone number individually to whatever room that one phone number is in. But it doesn't keep track of like, oh, all these phone numbers are in the same room with each other or anything like that. It has no idea. It just knows this phone number is in this room, and then everything's handled on the XMPP network. To the extent that the chat rooms themselves, I don't even create those on my server. Those are created on public Jabber servers that already exist, and they handle everything for the routing and everything. I just have to handle the bridge to SMS part. I also support whispering just because I felt like messaging to a user and having it just be like, no, you can't message me, was a suboptimal experience. So instead I chose a different suboptimal experience where you message to the user and they get like WoW style so-and-so whispers, blah, 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 and they can reply by using a whisper command. And then again, if they're like, man, I really want to have a one-on-one conversation with this person, then it's like, well, then stop doing it by using an SMS bot. That's a crazy way to have a one-on-one conversation with a person. Just like, honestly, if you have to use SMS for that, just text them. Yeah. The reason you're using the bot is so you can do something other than that. So I wrote the whole thing in Haskell, obviously. It's 739 lines in one file. That didn't happen on the first day, but it probably happened on the third day because I've only worked on it for 3.5 days. So there's a lot of threads and stuff, but the code's a little bit messy just because I don't have type signatures on almost anything because some of my lines are really long, but it's mostly pretty good. This is fun. This is a really fun part. So text messages have a maximum length. The maximum length is commonly believed to be 160 characters. That's not actually true, because it turns out text messages don't exist. SMS is not a text-based protocol. It's a binary protocol. And most devices support a limited number of character encodings and choose to believe that it's always text, but that's 100% false. There are headers, binary headers, like it's a whole thing. It's crazy, and just like most smartphones even, don't let app makers send arbitrary text messages. You can only send like these specific texty things that the OS supports. But the actual underlying SMS protocol is crazy. It's just like some headers and then a string of bytes. And you can send arbitrary Unicode, but then it's fewer characters. Or you could like invent your own compressed, you could like send BCD or something, and then you could send way more characters. Except that no phone supports BCD. But a bunch of them support Unicode because Japanese people like to text also. Yeah. So anyway, but at some point they get too big for one packet, and so it is commonly believed that at this point you cannot send a message longer than that. Also false. And most of you have seen this sort of worked out in your actual phones these days, where you send a really long message and your UI claims that it won't work, but then when you send it, your friend receives one big long message and it seems like it did work, like most of the time. Sometimes it doesn't happen, and that's because SMS doesn't guarantee delivery or delivery in order or delivery at all in the next reasonable period of time, and they might get pieces of that message 6 years from now. But like most of the time it works, and that's because it's got these headers, and there's a standard way, and there has been since the beginning of SMS, believe it or not, even though this is only a recent thing to be commonly supported by phones. The protocol has always supported headers for this is part one of whatever. And so you have and there's an ID. It gives it a conversation ID, part number, and total number of parts, so that the handset on the other end can easily tell different messages that are long apart from each other because of the ID, and then can use that to stitch them all together. Really cool. Basically every phone you buy these days supports both sending and receiving this kind of thing. The provider I'm using is humorous. When I send really long messages through the provider, they chunk it themselves and put like part number / total number : on the front of the text sent instead of using the standard headers. When they receive something that is using the standard headers, instead of stitching it together for you, they just stick part : number : of : total : on the front of the text they send to you, and they don't send you the ID. And normally I would be like, man, this is bad, I should switch providers. But as I already mentioned, this provider is really cheap, which is very beneficial to making this possible to do at all. So I wrote this thing that goes, I don't care about the ID. What are the odds that you sent me 2 messages that were both really long and it had to be split into exactly the same number of parts really close together? Like,
You've never talked to my wife.
man. So I just used the total number of parts as and the sender as the ID because that's all the information I have. And if that doesn't work, then bad things will happen. And then I've got this thread that basically takes in the chunks as they get parsed out. So this is like my parser to just parse off the stuff. And then down here I shove those into a channel, I read them out, and then I just sort of go over, I have like a map of maps where I go from the telephone number and the total to the time and a map from part to chunk of text. And then if I have all of the parts, if my total is equal to the size of the items, then I'm done. I stitch them all together and I send them into the room, which means that if you send a really long message via SMS to the chat room, it will actually be received in the room, stitched together, which is awesome. But then when it goes back out to people over SMS, they will receive it in chunks again. But the people using apps will see it all stitched together, which is pretty nice. And then I have another thing where it checks whether or not the parts are more than 60 seconds old, and if they are, then it discards them and sends a text message back to the sender saying, hey, I didn't get all the parts of your message. Could you send it again? Because SMS doesn't guarantee it will deliver them to me ever. And so I figure if I didn't get them in 60 seconds, I'm not going to keep waiting. I'm just going to forget about it and ask you to send again.
So it's possible they're never going to get that message that says that you need to resend it.
Also very true. Yep, SMS is great.
We are so smart.
It's pretty good, but like it kind of works. So yeah, so that's one of the interesting bits that are in here. It's a bunch of other stuff. I got some nice copy. Welcome to Cheogram, so good. Yeah, so I have some. This is like my command handler, where I parse out all the different sort of like slash commands there could be, because you could type like /invite and then a phone number to invite other people into a room that you're in, stuff like that. So I parse all that stuff out, and then I just have this big, huge case statement to be like, if I want to do this, then actually do it. Yeah, and all of these are pretty straightforward. The big, let me find, these big gross things are because instead of using, so I had a pretty nice XMPP library that I wanted to use, but it doesn't support a couple of the features that I need specifically for the way I'm implementing this. So the way that this is built is actually as what's called an XMPP external component. So what that means is that I'm not an XMPP server because I don't want to deal with like managing connections between me and every other server on the internet and like stuff like that, because that sounds hard. So what instead I do is I have a real XMPP server and I connect to that kind of as a client like you would with a bot, except that I want to be representing all of the users on a single host name instead of only one user like you would with a normal client connection. So I connect over what's called the component protocol, and I identify myself as, hi, I am sms.cheogram.com. The whole thing is me. And then the server just takes anything directed at that entire host name and sends it to me, and then I figure out whether that goes to a user that really exists or any of that kind of stuff I have to figure out. So they just blindly forward every stanza addressed at anything at that domain to me. Which is pretty convenient. And but the library that I was looking at using didn't support that. So I'm using a much lower level library where I can implement basically anything myself. But what that means is that I have to basically hand code all of the XML representations for any of the things I want, because it doesn't support like invites, for example. So here I'm gonna add someone as an owner. Instead of being like, add someone as an owner, like this library doesn't have any of those things. So instead I handcraft the XML element for representing the command to add someone as an owner, which isn't actually that bad. It's just kind of verbose because of things. Yeah, so that's actually most of why this code is so long. It's just because there's a lot of those things in here. And also there's a decent amount of duplication when I was just like, cut and paste this over here, do things. Yeah, there's also, I do a fair amount of mild abuses of the XMPP protocol in order to simplify my own code. So for example, here I'm going to create a room. So, no, I don't need this to do anymore, I did that. So when I create a room, I've got a list of a whole bunch of different public servers that I can create rooms on. And when the user tells me the name of the room they want, I go through each server and I ask it, hey, do you have a room by this name? And if they don't, then I make the room there. And if they do, then I move on to the next server. And I do that until I'm out of servers. And then on the last time, I start adding _ your telephone number to the room name until it gets unique, which you only have to happen once, because the odds that someone has the name you want _ your phone number created as a room name on any server anywhere is very small. So that's like the last resort. But instead of like storing, okay, I want to create this room, and then like actually having logic to send out over the connection and then wait until I get something back over the connection. But meanwhile, other stuff is happening on this same one connection, right? I've got stanzas flowing in and out from people talking, whatever. So I would have to have like some bookkeeping logic where I have like the ID of the thing I sent out, and then I wait for a reply to it, and I send that back to this thread. And I mean, it's not that hard, but it's just a lot of plumbing to build for just this one use case. So instead what I do is I package all of the interesting information into the from address of the request. So I send the request to ask whether or not a room exists from create@sms.cheogram.com / and then the telephone number that's trying to create the room, pipe, the name of the room they're trying to create, and then all of the servers I haven't tried yet separated by pipes. That's the from address. And then I send the request out. And then when the request comes back into some other part of my code, the part that handles all inbound stanzas, that part of the code has no idea that I ever did send this request out. I don't have any state anywhere that's keeping track of the fact that I did send a request at all. It just sees anything come into create@ and goes, oh, well, the only reason I would have sent anything from create@ is if I was creating a room, because that's not a phone number, so that's not a thing anyone else has control of. It's only this part of the code that's going to do that. So if anything comes into create@, then obviously I'm trying to create a room. So is this a success response or a failure response? If it's a failure response, great. There was no room, we'll create one. And otherwise, we have to keep trying. What should we keep trying? Well, what servers do we need to try on? We'll just parse that out of the resource here. Here are the other servers, and we'll try the next one. So I'm basically shuttling data to myself back and forth through the from address of the request response system. Yeah.
It fits. What's wrong with
Oh yeah. Well, it not only will it fit, like this is unbounded. It doesn't. I can put as much data in there as I want. I mean, if it got really big, that would be probably a bad idea. But it's never going to be really big. It's like 3 strings and a telephone number and a name. So it's not that bad. It's a little funny looking on the wire probably, but no one's looking at it, and it totally works.
It's really helpful for debugging, because if that thing comes in and it doesn't get handled, you know exactly what the hell it was from.
No, it's true. It's very nice. And this is one of the benefits I have of instead of being a single bot, being a component that controls an entire domain name, and is that any phone number at this domain I route to phones, and anything that isn't a phone number at this domain I can use for arbitrary anything else I want,
It's
right?
command.
It's some kind of, yeah, anything that I want. So yeah, so I'm doing that.
You could do that for delete, too.
Yeah, I could. I mean, I don't have delete. When everyone leaves a room, it deletes itself. But I'm using Tokyo Cabinet for all of my data storage because Tokyo Cabinet is awesome, basically. So yeah, that's what I'm doing there. What else is in here that's kind of interesting? This is my parser for all my slash commands. It's kind of boring. My data type represents all my slash commands, even more boring. Oh yeah, normalized telephone numbers. I mean, it's not super exciting, but yeah, it's really fun. The phone provider that I'm working with only supports, no, that's not true. Anyway, so conveniently, the phone provider that I'm working with also is over XMPP. So I didn't have to implement two protocols or 2 APIs here to do the SMS. I actually take in the XMPP packets that are from the chat room. I just have to do a mild transformation on it to make it to the right destination for the phone number, and then I push it back into the other server, and then it gets delivered as an SMS message, which is really convenient for me because then I only have to use one library and one kind of setup. for the whole thing. However, my server, as I mentioned before, I decided to always take fully qualified phone numbers that have a 1 on them. So that's what this one does. It says if it is not all digits, then it's not a phone number. Bah. Otherwise, if it's 10 long, then like put a 1 on it, because that's probably what you meant for now. And if it's 11, then just make sure the first one is a 1, because we only support North America for now. Otherwise, error. But for them, I have to do the reverse. If it's 10, great, then just add SMS on it. If it's 11, make sure the first is 1 and then take it off. Because they want North American phone numbers without a country code. But you would say, well, do they not support international texting? No, they totally do. And then you need the country code. I don't know why they designed it that way. Anyway, I have international texting turned off on my plan anyway, because that costs more and I don't want anyone to do it. Because it would cost me money. Yeah. A lot of forever loops where I just get stanzas and then do stuff with them and get more of them. This is my big long do everything section where I just handle every kind of stanza that might exist. There's more fun hacks like this where I make the ID of the request Cheogram create %, and then a UUID. And then later I check, am I getting a response to something with an ID that starts with Cheogram create %? If so, that's probably it came from this code. Yeah, lots of fun things to circumvent having to actually do any bookkeeping myself. And because the protocols, XMPP is basically the only protocol ever where the spec is good and people tend to implement it properly. And that's basically because they have one of the most amazing communities in terms of just the overall design of the protocol, testing things out, doing the whole process. They're basically like the whole XMPP body acts like a mini IETF off on the side with only people who care about this one protocol, and every single kind of extension or feature that you could ever want gets built into a properly specified extension protocol after it's been vetted in the wild for a while, and they're quite willing to make new versions of them and deprecate old ones and create proper like transition paths and the whole thing. And they actually use the features of XML that are good, and they don't use any of the features that are not good. And like they're a really amazing community in terms of having things. I mean, if you get an XMPP client from the 90s, it still works today. But if you get a new one, it does tons more things that are awesome. But if you don't have support for those things, it still works. Like it's in general very well done that way. It's like this protocol, for example, is specified for making it so that you can like type in your MSN contact's Hotmail address and have it automatically convert through whatever gateway into a thing, because that's what was popular when they wrote the spec. But they just like have continued to update it and iterate on it enough so that it still totally supports the use case it was built for, but also I can use it for phone numbers and SMS translations. This is the part that lets me, I can send in a description that just says, please enter your contact's phone number, and it'll actually say this in the UI. If you open up a thing, you'll click add contact by SMS, and then it'll say to you, please enter your contact's phone number, because it gets this text from me, and then you follow the prompts. It's pretty fun.
So would you handle the multilingual stuff on the server side, or is that?
Yeah, so it has full support for multilingual on the server side if you want. You put XML lang equals whatever for as many languages as you support. Obviously the client is free to try and do other things if it knows how. But yeah, and again, like it's not like every client will see this. You have to have added it to your contact list. So if I don't support a language that you're able to read, probably you didn't add me to your contact list. But I can add support for as many languages as I want easily on the server side. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what else is cool in here. Some stuff. It's a lot of code, but most of it is just like look for the thing. Oh, this was a fun. I just finished saying. So this is an interesting case. So this is the only workaround I have in the entire code base, because in general people implement the spec pretty well. This is a weird case though, because it's totally up to your sort of interpretation. Basically, so the spec says that when you create a new chat room that did not previously exist, that the server returns to you code 201, and then you either ask for the configuration for the room so that you can set up settings before anyone's allowed to join, or else you refuse to configure the room and the server just goes with the defaults. That's what the spec says. What the server I use does is it simply never creates, there's no such thing as a new room being created. If you join a room that didn't already exist, as far as the server is concerned, it did already exist. Basically, the server is written in such a way that every room that could exist does exist and just happens to be empty, have no one in it. So because the way that you create a room is by joining a room that didn't exist. And so you just say, join this room, and the server, instead of saying, aha, I don't have that, I will create it for you, just says, aha, I have that, because I have literally every room that could possibly exist, you have joined. And so I was trying to do this thing, this was another one of my things where I was trying to make the protocol do my work for me, where I said, okay, well, instead of remembering whether I'm creating a room or not, I'll just send join, and if I was creating it, it'll send me 201, and then I'll do the setup to make it members only or whatever else I need to do. But that server doesn't send me 201, because as far as it's concerned, the room did exist already. Which is not actually a violation of the spec at all. Like, I was talking to them in their channel, and I was like, doesn't that violate the spec? And they're like, it only violates the spec if you think that the room was created. But as far as we're concerned, the room was not created, it already existed. We don't check to see if it's there and then tell you, we don't lie to you and say it was there when it wasn't. It just was. Okay, they all are. Which is not technically wrong. It just meant that I couldn't be as lazy in this case as I wanted to be. But since I had already written it the lazy way, I then I kept support for that and then added this other thing where I actually store in Tokyo Cabinet whether I was creating or not and do that. So that's one piece of state I had to plumb myself, basically because they don't do it for me. The next version of that server will optionally allow you to set whether or not every room exists. So they're going to have a config flag to say, actually, rooms don't all exist. They can be created. Which changes nothing except that it will actually have a storage thing that it will look in and then send you 201 in the case that it's not. Like, that's basically the change. There's a couple other little changes that go with that involving the locking stuff, but yeah. And then they've said that if that goes well, they might make that the default in the future, but what they specifically said to me was, until you came in today, no one has ever wanted that feature before, so it didn't matter, which is fair, because there's not really, I mean, if for a normal UI, there's no difference at all between joining an empty room and creating a room, really. The specific difference, and it sort of matters for my case, is if you create a room, then you might want to configure it before it's created. If you join an empty room, then it already exists, and people could have joined it before. But that's a little bit of a misnomer because it's basically a race condition situation. Because if they join it before I do, even in the create case, then they get to create it, and I don't get to create it. So it's a little weird. Because I'm making members only rooms, so my idea was like, we'll create the room, and then we'll set it to members only, and now it exists, so now no one could have joined it between me creating it and me setting it to members only. So I solved that race condition. Except that it doesn't really solve it, because if they happen to create just before me, then I can't even get in. So, I don't know. It's not really a real problem, because hopefully you don't have 1,000 people all trying to create rooms with exactly the same name at the same time. So probably it's not a real thing, which is fair. Yeah, so that's the thing I ran into at one point. It happened. Lots of language settings that are all set to English. More telephone number stuff. Yeah. Some nice error handling where I get an error. I'm just like, error. Here's the error text that I got from the server. I don't know. I text it to you because I'm like, I have no idea what happened. Something bad. Don't do that.
You figure it out.
Go away. Stop being crazy. some weird things with my XML handling library, because again, I'm not using the library I would normally use, so this one seems to sometimes not put the namespace onto an attribute, because I think it just goes, oh, well, that's an attribute on an element that had a namespace, so I'll just leave the namespace off in the data type. It was a weird choice. So I just have all these things that go like, yeah, the one with the namespace or the one with no namespace, because whatever, it's fine. I know what's going on. Yeah. Fun stuff. Well, yeah, there's two different, so this is a perfect example of that thing I was talking about where they're willing to upgrade things. So there's two different ways to send invitations. Yeah, I'm basically done. There's two different ways to send invitations in XMVP. You can send them either by asking the chat room to invite people or by sending the invite directly. And there are pros and cons to both. So instead of having a big flame war over which one was the right one, or insisting to keep only one in the spec or whatever, they just wrote both, made them both into two different extension protocols, specified them completely, and then we're like, you should probably implement both of these. But like one is older. Like there was one that they originally thought of, and then someone came along and was like, there's other things better. So they were like, that also looks like it has good things about it. The direct invitations are considered almost always the right way to do it, unless you're using members-only rooms, which I am. But realistically, like there's just, basically the thing is, if you have a direct invitation, you'll always receive it from people who are on your contact list, even if you block people who aren't on your contact list. But the room doesn't know you've been invited, so if it's a members-only room, it can't add you to the membership list. But on the other hand, if you tell the room to invite someone, now the room knows you've been invited, so it can give you permission to come in. But if the room isn't in your contact list, which it obviously isn't because you are being invited to it, then if you block people who aren't on your contact list, you won't even get the invite. So what I do is I send both kinds, and I'm able to receive both kinds, because the spec for the direct invitations specifically says that if you receive both, you should ignore one of them. So I just send both, and then it doesn't matter what your client supports, it'll always work. And if your client shows you both, then it's broken. Yeah, that's basically everything that's interesting in here. Any questions or anything? Yeah.
Does MMS fix any of the problems that you were talking about with like packing or packeting?
Yeah, so MMS is interesting. The problem with MMS is not in the protocol, it's in the implementation. So like, not in the implementation. How should I say this? It's because cell phone providers are garbage. So MMS is significantly less garbage than SMS. However, most cell phone providers put the support for MMS in the same kind of bucket category as support for just data generally. And as soon as you have support for data generally, you can get things even better than MMS. Like there are a vanishingly small number of people who have very good access to MMS and don't have access to arbitrary data. So if there were a lot of those people, then MMS would be totally a platform to build for. But as it is, a lot of people have SMS but not good MMS, and a lot of people have data and decent MMS, and very few people have decent MMS and no data. And so basically no one significant builds against MMS for anything for that reason. Because if you want to deliver stuff that you can't do over SMS, and you do it over data, then you'll get almost as many people as doing it over MMS. So, I mean, at a protocol level, yes, it totally does solve a lot of the problems. But as far as like people's relationship to their carriers goes, it doesn't turn out to be worth it most of the time.